Welcome to Strategic Podcast. Today, we are incredibly privileged to be joined by Dawit Mezgebe, a PhD candidate at the Center for African and Asian Studies at Addis Ababa University. Dawit's research sits at the critical intersection of mobility and citizenship, offering a vital lens through which to understand some of the most pressing geopolitical and social dynamics shaping the global south. In a world where borders, belonging, and the very meaning of rights are constantly being contested, his work provides essential scholarly insight into the realities of human movement, state sovereignty, and identity formation across African and Asian contexts. We're eager to delve into his findings to better comprehend the strategic implications of these complex global flows and the evolving nature of political membership in the 21st century.
Welcome to our strategic podcast. Ato Dawit Mezgebe, we're really happy to have you here today with us. I'm going to proceed with the questions.
Okay, thank you for having me. It's my pleasure.
All right. So the first question is, the Horn Strategic Geography has invited repeated cycles of foreign militarization and intervention. So what mechanisms can regional states build to manage external security presence while preserving regional autonomy?
So this is a very good question. In order to preserve regional autonomy, to have a sort of independence, the Horn of Africa, the states in the Horn of Africa region should have to do a lot. This needs like political, economic, social, cultural, and all sorts of cooperation among these states. But unfortunately, what is the Horn of Africa? Where is it? How do we define it? That is the most important concept, specifically if you are supposed to be a scholar of political science. Then the first thing what has to come every time is concepts has to be clear. So Horn of Africa, it's having multiple definitions. For example, the very well-known American political scientist Peter Woodward, he's having a book on the Horn of Africa. But different Western scholars were trying to give different definitions, but the very authoritative governing definition of Horn of Africa is given by Professor Masfin Woldemariam in his book, Horn of Africa, Conflict and Poverty. Therefore, when we say Horn of Africa, all those countries which are sharing land boundary with Ethiopia, we call them Horn of African countries. The region is this one, the actual one. But late in the 1990s, at the end of 1990s, Bill Clinton, the then US president, has come up with a new idea of Greater Horn that is expanding all the way to the Great Lake regions. So, coming back to your question, first we should have to make a specific definition of the Horn of Africa. All those countries which are sharing land boundary with Ethiopia, according to Professor Masfin Woldemariam's book, 1999, we call them Horn of Africa, that is a region. And to bring about sort of, to avoid foreign intervention, militarization of the region, the first thing what the states should have to do is they should have to work on strengthening their cooperation, specifically political, economic, and social cooperation. But the greater difficulty, the major impediment, specifically political impediment, is the colonial legacy. As you know, the Horn of Africa is a very strategic geopolitical space. So Italians, the French, the British, they just came and divided this region. Therefore, this division by these multiple, what you call colonial powers, has an impact, a very negative impact in making a cooperation among these states. That's why, rather than having a back-to-back cooperation, or rather than trying to be interdependent with each other, foreign powers, you can call them major powers, or otherwise what you call across the Red Sea, we are having the Gulf and Arab states. These are having not only the Gulf and Arab states, including Iran. Even nowadays, North Korea, they are having their own interest in the Horn of Africa region. Therefore, to avoid militarization, to bring about a sort of harmony, specifically to bring about a development in all sorts of what you call walks of life, these states should have to cooperate with each other. But it's unfortunate, the more of they are suspicious than cooperating with each other. And as I've said, the colonial legacy, then the negative scars of this colonial legacy and the post-independence, what you call political scenarios, have made them to focus on. I mean, they are gatekeepers. They just keep the gates of the West. They are their donors. So economic independence is the most important one. Then political independence is the most important one. Achieving political independence, then economic independence, and then using mechanisms like IGAD. If they are trying to bring about cooperation, then we can resolve those issues, because one can be the guarantor of security for the other. But what we are observing now is, rather than intra-regional guarantors, seeking intra-regional guarantors. These states are looking for outside forces, exogenous forces. That's what I can say.
Well, you answered that perfectly. And I'm going to proceed to the second question that I have. So, how can Ethiopia and its neighbors redefine the terms of Gulf and great power engagement, which is moving from reactive acceptance to proactive regional agenda in the setting?
So the most important thing is actually, as you know, there was IGAD first, IGADD, Intergovernmental Authority on Drought and Development.
Okay.
Immediately after independence, except Ethiopia, the Horn of African countries, there was what you call recurrent drought, famine, and these are hallmarks of this region. Then violence, conflicts, war, intra and interstate wars, and so forth. Then they formed this IGAD, then they transformed this IGAD to single D, Intergovernmental Authority on Development. The major objective of this regional international organization is to bring about a sort of first cooperation, then from cooperation in politics, then in geopolitics you should have to go to integration. But this couldn't be achieved. For example, specifically with regard to Ethiopia, it's being, for example, being independent for a longer period of time, and then being the major ally of these major powers in the world. What there is scholars in the Harvard, they call Ethiopia the anchor state in the Horn of Africa. So this has made others to look into, to see Ethiopia suspiciously. For example, you can take Sudan, how Sudan was reacting, the entire Sudan, the ex-Sudan, the ex-proper Sudan, how it was reacting, then Somalia. And then again, the Horn of Africa, what most scholars always forget and ignore is it's not only the Gulf states or other what you call these Arab countries, but specifically Ethiopia being the water tower of Africa, having 4 major river systems. Out of the 4, the 3 are almost flowing to the neighboring countries. They call Ethiopia the African water tower. Therefore, Egyptians are having a long enduring, suspicious, what you call foreign policy towards Ethiopia since the oldest time. Mm-hmm. Therefore, these states, number one, the political power they are gambling with. What I'm trying to say is, for example, rather than trying to bring about peace and security in the Horn of Africa, specifically having this what you call African Union, the headquarters in Addis Ababa, even IGAD around Nairobi and Djibouti, these countries, based on the amount of capital that's flowing from either the West, China, Russia, or Russia, or the Gulf, they are focusing, giving attention to those countries. Therefore, there has to be a very integrated, organized, structured, what you call relationship they should have to create on. Otherwise, the suspicion will continue. That's what they are doing.
Well, I'm going to proceed to the third question.
Okay.
So, Ethiopia's maritime debate often focuses on regaining Red Sea access, particularly through Assab or Massawa. But given its growing economic and infrastructural ties through Djibouti, Berbera, and even Lamu, how viable and how imperative is it for Ethiopia to see itself not just as a Red Sea nation, but as part of the wider Indian Ocean system?
Yeah, actually, as you have said, it's a good question. The access to the sea, specifically for Ethiopia, what makes so sad the reality with regard to Ethiopia being the largest landlocked country in Africa, we can say, is the most important thing is Ethiopia has been made landlocked artificially. Mm-hmm. Naturally, Assab belongs to Ethiopia. For example, forget Massawa. Massawa, if you know Eritrea, Massawa is 120 kilometers from Asmara. Mm-hmm. But when you take Assab, there is no any land connection within Eritrea. They call the province or the Auraja, what they call it Auraja, Dankaria. There is no any land transport. So if you just would like to go from Assab all the way to Asmara or any other place, Karan or any other place in Eritrea, you should have to come through Bure, then either through Tigray, through Gondar. You should have to go to Eritrea to proceed. Okay. So the saddest thing is Ethiopia has been choked in terms of its foreign relations, specifically in terms of its access to the sea, purposefully, deliberately by the Italian colonial powers. Not only Italians, but all those colonial powers that were defeated by the victory of Adwa. The victory of Adwa, we should have to take this very seriously, because the victory of Adwa has made the Western colonizing powers to rethink their foreign policy in the long term. If we are supposed to give access or to the so-called state Ethiopia, then that will be difficult. Therefore, the most important way they just followed as a foreign policy was to choke it. So, for example, you can take Democratic Republic of Congo. Belgians, when they were ruling that big country, resourceful country, they just took an access to the sea through the Atlantic, taking land from Angola, I think they just took land from Angola. So Ethiopia has been made landlocked. First of all, it's artificial. Then, as the Prime Minister was saying yesterday in the House of People's Representative, the legal issues. For example, what was the mechanism of losing this ASAP? For example, from Bure, if you go to Wollo, from Bure to ASAP is 40 kilometers. 40 kilometers.
Very close.
Very close. I mean, even you can, someone can travel can walk or can go on there. But we are missing that one. So why should we go to Berbera, for example? Why should we go to either Kismayo or Lamu in Kenya? Why should we go to Port Sudan while we are having this one? And the other important thing is, as the Prime Minister yesterday said, specifically the mechanism, the deliberation, ASAP has been almost snatched from us. It's being snatched from us is questionable, whether you call it legally, politically, diplomatically, and all other sorts. So Ethiopia should have to emphasize to gain access to the way, our only way to the sea is ASAP. Of course, we should have to take the other ones. But Djibouti, even it was ours. It was ours before its name was Obok, being colonized by the French. But take, for example, after losing access in ASAP and other places in the last 14, 15, or 16, or 20 years, Ethiopia has spent more than 74 billion US dollars trying to get an access through Djibouti. And take this into account, how many universities, how many big airports, how many huge dams, kind of infrastructure, what we are supposed to create. Okay. Therefore, so we should have to make a diplomatic engagement. The first thing is a diplomatic engagement. So that is the most important one.
Well, you answered that deliberately. I'm going to proceed to the fourth question of our podcast. So, Ethiopia and Horn of Africa, its Horn of Africa neighbors, share deep historical and strategic ties. Yet the region often accepts a strategic intervention by external actors, which means like Gulf states or global powers, within little challenge or their legitimacy. So my question is, how should Ethiopia interpret this double standard, especially as it seeks a sovereign presence on the Red Sea and secure maritime access to address long-standing strategic vulnerabilities, given that when a country in the region requests similar measures, it is treated as a problem and faces intense scrutiny. So how does this go?
Yeah, so again, for example, if you are supposed to go back and read history books, Eritrea being colonized by the way, before colonization, before Eritrea was being colonized, ASAP was under the province of Wollo. It was Italians who deliberately, the Italian companies and Italian colonial powers that took that particular land, which belongs to the people of Afar and Ethiopians in general. So, with regard to your question, double standard. The West is very well known in advancing double standard. But what makes, in terms of diplomacy and foreign relation, Ethiopia different from other Horn of Africa, whether you call it the entire African states, is our diplomatic engagement is the longest one. Our diplomats, our archives tells you exactly what special mechanism we already used in bringing about these issues. For example, in getting back Eritrea. The same way what the Prime Minister is speaking and what people are raising now, the same issues were strangling Ethiopia in its foreign relation with different countries when Ethiopia was trying to get back Eritrea. So the same diplomatic wisdom, the same diplomatic wiseness, the same very strategic, well-crafted foreign policy is important in trying to get the ASAP. We should have to convince those people, because for the West, there is no permanent friendship, as the Americans say. They are only having what you call permanent national interest. So trying to balance. Now the world is, as you know, the world is shifting from unipolar. Actually, there is no unipolar world order anymore. The United States is purposefully, deliberately, it's losing its hegemony. So we are now having new rising powers actually they are not new. America is
already there.
America is a new one. For example, if you take Chinese civilization, it is a civilization that existed more than 5,000 years.
Exactly.
If you take Russia, for example, as a state, Russian Empire, it's since 12th century. So if we are trying to make a balance, foreign policy balance with these countries, if we are trying to convince these states, and at the same time, Ethiopia, specifically Addis Ababa, the third largest diplomatic city in the world, where more than 120 embassies are here. Major international organizations are here. So diplomacy is all about talking, implicit and explicit. So you should have to express them your national interest. So we should have to work hard. I mean, either in public diplomacy, summit diplomacy, conference diplomacy, or the traditional form of diplomacy through ambassadors and so forth. So we should have to tell them, we should have to make clear, we should have to make it explicit that a country, a nation, having almost 130 million people cannot continue being landlocked for long. For example, if you go again to ASAP, for example, if you go to ASAP, it was Ethiopia that built the refinery. But in Eritrea, nobody is using it now.
Exactly.
Everything is closed. So the benefit, accessing the sea or Red Sea through ASAP, it's not only beneficial for Ethiopia. It's only beneficial for our brothers and sisters in Eritrea. It's unemployment. It's a more in-depth integration. It creates a more in-depth integration. The same people, but two different countries. So we should have to convince them. Again, what we must understand is the Western foreign policy is a continuity of more than centuries. So in whatever way they can, they are trying to block us apart from getting the access. With regard to the Arabs and the Gulf state, again, diplomacy has to play its role. I mean, by the way, Red Sea is the most important international trade corridor. More than 93% of global oil is flowing and passing through that one. So the government is expected to do a lot more.
Okay. Well, you answered that perfectly.
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to proceed to the next question. In a volatile Horn of Africa, where external actors like Egypt seek leverage and attempt to turn regions against Ethiopia, how should Ethiopia operationalize a Horn-first policy to secure regional partnership and protect its strategic interests, notably sovereign Red Sea access and neutralized divide and rule tactics, without triggering open escalation?
Actually, it's a very good question. As I'm telling you, when you study Horn of Africa, you cannot study the Horn of Africa without Egypt. Egypt is a part and parcel of Horn of Africa, because 85% of the river Nile, what we call Nile, but from our perspective, what we call Abba, 85% of the water is contributed from Ethiopia. So Egyptians, they just would like, in whatever way, they just would like to make sure that, or to get an insurance in whatever way, through violence, war, or insecurity of Ethiopia, the flow of this river. So the most important thing here is smart leadership is the most important one. It's not only giving priority. Horn of Africa, it's not Horn of Africa first. As a scholar, working, having such an exposure in reading, what you must keep in your mind is, specifically in the so-called United Nations Security Council, the most important, the very powerful organ is the Security Council. The same way Emperor Haile Selassie did, the same way all those foreign ministers, diplomats did. We should have to start our work, our diplomatic work, our whatever propaganda, whatever you call it propaganda, or any form of disseminating information work from the United Nations Security Council. We should have to convince them that the access to the sea is for what you call peaceful purpose of developing this country. Again, we should have to tell the Horn of African states, we should have to convince them that getting access to the sea through ASAP or any other sort of these regional ports, it's not a threat for them. But as I'm telling you, the colonial legacy, take for example Somalia. the British Somaliland, we are having the the Italian Somaliland. Even these two, they are having a difference. They don't agree with each other. Then the diplomatic work is toughest. Again, when you take to Djibouti, the Afars on the one hand, the Isas on the other hand, there is a confrontation even with that one. The same people we are having the same people. Even Somalis, we are having the same Somali people in Ethiopia. So, again, Sudan is doing what you call an office boy type job for Egyptians. They are like messengers. So, again, don't take it for granted that the Kenyans will be okay, because if we are supposed to get an access of getting sea, it is a threat for Kenya, because Kenyans, we should have to take into account this one. Kenyans perceive us, even in terms of development, they just perceive us as a threat, because if Ethiopia gets an access to the sea, then they just think different things. Because
like what? Like, can you articulate more on that? What would they think?
For example, rather than Ethiopia is having or using the port as a port, they just would like us to use the Lamu port. If we are supposed to use the Lamu port, then that is a dependency on Kenya. Therefore, they are having whatever form of leverage, whether you call it diplomatic, economic, political, or military, or any other. By the way, the issue of a port is not as such simple and easy. People think that, for example, take Djibouti, even take Eritrea itself. These two countries are they are having what you call a seat in the Arab League. They are having a seat in the Arab League. I think on a sort of, not full members, but they are having a seat in the Arab League. What does it mean? In any war, for example, if any war breaks out, or if Ethiopia is facing a security threat, then Djibouti, for example, the largest leverage they are having is they can block our access to the military. For example, you cannot access military equipment through Djibouti. The same way Kenyans may think that one. Take, for example, simple example. Take Kenyan Airways and Ethiopian Airlines. You can see how Kenyans are trying to compete and copy what Ethiopian Airlines is doing. No, so this is not only on this sphere. For example, take on the marathon or in the athletics. We were the ones, they are just copying and pasting, and now they are marginalizing. The same issue should have to be careful. So diplomatically, we should have to convince people, specifically the nations. By the way, when we talk about regional cooperation, Ethiopian access to the Red Sea has economic benefit for Djibouti, economic benefit for Eritrea, economic benefit for Sudan, and regional integration, people could integrate. These people are identical, by the way. It's colonialism that has divided, making these artificial, what you call, boundaries.
Okay. Well, I'm going to proceed to the next question. So, Ethiopia and Yemen share deep historical and cultural ties across the Red Sea, as we know, and Yemen lies just across the Bab el-Mandeb, and some waterways closer to Ethiopia than ports of the Horn itself. So, in today's shifting alliances and Red Sea rivalries, how should Ethiopia view its relationship with Yemen? Is it as a maritime neighbor, a security partner, or a strategic partner informed by these long-standing ties?
Yeah. So again, when you say Yemen, I think we should have to have a clearer picture. Again, Yemen was divided between two, North and South Yemen. Now the Yemen has come closer. It's being now reorganized again. But the issue of Yemen is, whether you call it politically or militarily or economically, it is a headache for the West, specifically after the Houthis took power in that country. So diplomacy is all about wisdom. Specifically, traditional diplomacy is all about, it has to be based on a win-win scenario. So we should have to take Yemenis in all sorts of positive way. For example, they can be our security allies, if we are supposed to treat them like an independent sovereign state. But the problem, as you have raised in the first question, the problem in the Horn of Africa is the Horn of Africa states. Almost all of them, rather than having what you call regional closest relationship, they are most of the time they are dependent on the external powers. So, for example, take Djibouti. China is having its naval base there. The United States is having a huge military camp, and the French are having their camp. So, they just, by the way, this militarization of the region is not only about securing their military interests, but they are also trying to secure their national interests. They just would like to see each and every step and activity of these states, what they are doing. So being smart, being strategic, being wise, for example, we can have all sorts of good relationship with the Houthi government of Yemen, for example, whether as security allies, again, in clear issues, we should have to go forward and be clear, either to the West or others. And the other one is specifically Ethiopia's membership with the BRICS. This one has to be given emphasis. So being a member with the BRICS, again, it tries to create a balance. So Ethiopia taking this international organization as a shield tries to create a balance in somewhat entertaining the interest of what you call a win-win scenario between the Yemenis and Ethiopians. So for me, Yemenis are not a threat. The Houthi government is not a threat. But we should have to properly utilize, balance our interests, utilize and balance our interests with these people.
Well, okay. So I'm going to proceed to the next question. How should the countries of the Horn of Africa interpret and respond to Saudi Arabia's investment-driven strategic push into the region, given Riyadh's expansionist state interest, and what concrete collective and national steps can Horn states take to convert Saudi capital from a source of external leverage into stable, sovereignty-preserving partnerships?
Yeah. So again, Saudi investment. So we should have to see what is this, the Saudi government, what is it doing, for example? How is its relationship, specifically? The Saudis, as we know, they are the backbone of the American economy because the so-called petrodollar, their petroleum product is almost attached with the dollar. The global payment has been petrodollar because as a result of Saudi's influence, economic influence. But again, we should have to see Saudi's interest even within the Arabian Peninsula. For example, the Saudis, they just would like to be the leaders, specifically in making the others to follow, like the Omanis, the Qataris, the United Arab Emirates, and so forth. But at the same time, the Saudi relation with Iran, within the Islamic world itself, has to be given emphasis. Because Iranians are now, whether we like it or not, this is an emerging power. With all those sanctions, the second highly sanctioned country next to Russia, but trying to be able to self-accommodating in everything, in advanced military technology, in all sorts, in science, in everything. So Saudi's relation with, again, with Iran has to be seen again. Again, the Saudis with China, for example, the day before yesterday or the day before yesterday, as you have heard in major mainstream media, yuan is supposed to be pegged with Saudi oil. Therefore, the Saudi investment is not only positive, but it has to be seen in a very different perspective. Because for everything, we should have to see the front and the back. So the Saudis can use a divide and rule mechanism. For example, do they have a neutral stand with regard to Ethiopia, for example, with regard to Nile, this Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam? We know what their Minister of Foreign Affairs were saying, what stand they were having, how biased the Saudi, what you call foreign policy was. So when the Saudis are coming, it's not only the Saudis, but there are others which are supposed to follow their footsteps, the Qataris, the Gulf nations. So there is a confrontation. So the Horn of Africa nowadays has been a playing field, specifically in militarization, in security, in economics, and so forth. And the West, all those nations which are having a capital, whether you call it a military, political, or economic capital, they just would like to have their own stooge in the Horn of Africa. They just would like to have their own anchor state. So the problem is, by the way, it's not only nowadays, it's not only Saudi Arabia, for your surprise. Again, Turkey is having a dream of the Ottoman Empire, resurrecting the Ottoman Empire. So the Turkeys, for example, we know what they are doing in Somalia. They are the Qataris on the one hand, the Turkeys against the Saudis. So The dynamics in the Horn of Africa is very complex. It needs, very well-dedicated diplomats, and not only well-dedicated diplomats, but in our academics, in our curriculum, either from all the way from lower level up to the universities. The curriculum should have to be redesigned, and we should have to create an informed citizen. Otherwise, it will be acting like a mix ship if we are thinking that everybody is having a positive outlook for the Horn of Africa. Every state, whether it's from the Gulf, whether you call it from Australia, from the West, or any other place, whether China, Russia, Iran, or others, they are having their own national interest. The homework for Horn of Africa leaders is how do they balance these issues? Not only balancing the interest of these states, but how do they balance their interest first? Their interest first, they should have to aggregate their interest, then they should have to proceed in making what you call substantial gains. Otherwise, individually, it's for any other power from outside Horn of Africa, a divide and rule tactic will continue. And this will totally having a very destructive and negative impact on the Horn of African diplomacy and politics.
Well, we've had great discussions so far. So I'm going to ask you the closing question. So as Ethiopia and the Horn of Africa redefine their place in rapidly changing global order, what kind of regional future do you envision? Is it one shaped by external powers, or one built through the collective strategy agency of the region itself?
This is a very good question, actually. In politics, there is no any prophecy. You cannot prophesy that this will happen or that will happen. But trends, what we see from the past, today, and looking from the past, analyzing, examining the past, rethinking today what's going on, then we can forecast, maybe we can see. But what is the trend? What do you observe? Specifically, 1884, what you call this, the Berlin Conference in partitioning Africa. From this time onward, the Horn of Africa is one of the most important hot regions in politics, economics, and all sorts of things, in militarization. So, the other way around, when you see the global politics, there is what you call in political science hegemonic theory. When you see this theory tells you that there will not be any single hegemon. The hegemons will change. And what we are observing, not only observing, but what we are witnessing now is how the hegemony of the United States, its new world order after 1945, is crumbling. So it's because the West is controlling the mainstream media, the digital media, all the platform and the infrastructure. People think that the United States is the most powerful, but you can take in terms of military. Russia is having a destructive nuclear capacity. They can turn the whole world into what you call a nuclear ash 8,000 times, again and again. Again, the Chinese, with such advancement in economics, even controlling what you call these rare earth metals, dominating the global productive cycle, economic production cycle, then new what you call powers are emerging. So don't take easy like Iran, states like Iran, even North Korea. So the Horn of Africa, unless and otherwise, the leaders, the people in this region, if they are not supposed to do and reorganize their home properly, for example, if the Djiboutians are thinking that the French will guarantee them their security, the same way the Somalis are thinking that it is the British that guarantee their security. Again, in Sudan, the Sudans, they think that Egypt can guarantee their security. So if these Horn of African nations are thinking that they are having external or exogenous guarantors of security rather than cooperating with each other, then that is a problem. So what do we need? We need enlightened leaders in the Horn of Africa, not only in the Horn of Africa, in the entire Africa. Enlightened leaders who understand what's going on globally. So take, for example, West Africa, Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso. And take what the French are, not only the French, European Union, even the Germans, even the United States of America, how they are making an open trade. But these two countries, young leaders, they are trying to reimagine, not only reimagine, they are creating a new strategy on how to handle their relationship with the outside world, how to balance. By the way, I'm saying again, every nation is having its own permanent national interest, no permanent threat. So the Horn of heads of state or whatever elites, if we are supposed to have in the Horn of Africa, because elites in Africa, the definition of elite in Africa is totally wrong. So whatever we are having, those in power, first they should have to somewhat regroup themselves together, try to readdress the issues, try to think forward. For example, no African leader, specifically in the Horn of Africa, should have to be proud because the Horn of Africa still, the famines, the droughts, the civil war, the conflict, the insecurity is going on. But at the same time, the Horn of Africa is also having a hope. For example, when you take the Grand Ethiopian Dam, which was all the river Nile, or what you call Abba actually, Abba, that was flowing for more than 3,000 years without nobody's controlling, and in such a critical time, having huge diplomatic, military, or all sorts of pressure against Ethiopia. What we did in the Grand Ethiopian Dam is a huge success and achievement. What does this tell, for example? If the Horn of African countries, if the head of states, if the politicians, if they can cooperate with each other, for example, using this dam, we can be self-sufficient in terms of electricity. This tells you how we can make an integration. Then, for example, in telecom and all other sorts of. So, the solution for the Horn of African problem is within the Horn of Africa. I don't expect any solution from the outside world. But this does not mean that the outside world is not having what you call an influence. But a systemic, a very strategic, a very wise leadership needs, collective, not, for example, what if Ethiopia is only engaging, then if the rest are going against, it has no any benefit. So it has to be collective. The so-called collective security mind should have to prevail in the Horn of Africa. That's what I can say.
We have had such discussion at Dawit Mezgebe. Really honored to have you here. And we're going to close our discussion here. And thank you for coming.
Thank you very much for having me. It's my pleasure.